All right, so let us carry on with the sixth video lecture on the topic of young adult. And we left off, we were talking about friendship, or I was real quick to talk about friendship. But basically, the point of this slide is that remember the crisis is intimacy or isolation. And this offers a model of the evolution of relationships from a sort of casual interaction to self-disclosure to identifying yourself as a couple. I do want to talk a little bit about love. I enjoy this topic, and I like to say I could have a whole lecture on the topic of love. Matter of fact, in my marriage and family class, I do. We have a whole chapter on the topic of love, right? So basically, like love is this very abstract, emotional kind of thing, and there's different theorists that have argued. There's lots of writing about it, and it's considered desirable, and blah blah blah. It's really important in our culture. Even though some would argue it's kind of like all in our head. We could talk about it from a neuropsycho perspective, and we could talk about dopamine and serotonin and all of this other stuff, but that's not what we're going to cover here. So in your chapter, it discusses both love styles and the triangle theory of love. And I have scales, but I don't remember for which one is in your chapter. I know I have one on love languages. I find the concept of love languages to be the most useful. And what effectively this model says is that love is that this phenomena, this experience that we call love, is a way that we communicate with people, or we express this phenomena in different communication styles, and we call those love languages. You might be fairly familiar with this. This is kind of pop culture these days. And those 5 styles are words, gifts, time together, acts of service, and words of affirmation. And the key is, if you know your love language and you know that of your partners, you will better be able to communicate love to each other. Because what often happens is one partner has one love language and the other partner has the other. And so one will say, "You just don't love me." And the other person will say, "What are you talking about? I express my love to you all the time when I do the dishes." Right? And so by knowing what your language is and knowing what their language is, you will know when they're loving you, like when they're expressing their language to you, and you can express love to them in a language that they understand. That's the key, right? It's all about communicating. My favorite way of thinking about love, though, is when I see people how they want to be seen, and I express that. So for instance, the other day I was in a conversation with a colleague, and it's important to her that she be a nice person. And so when I said to her, "You're really a nice person," that affirmed what is important to her, and she that made her feel good, right? So I was able to love her by acknowledging she was who she wanted to be. Ooh, so then you get kind of abstract. Okay, but I'm digressing. So love languages. So touch, right? That's obviously hold hands, have sex, sit close together. Men are more likely to be touch. Gifts refer to things. I mean, they can be expensive gifts, but not necessarily things, trinkets, even pics that you see when you're apart and that you share with your significant, you share with this person to say, "See, while we were apart, I thought of you, and I bring this thing to you as a trinket that I thought of you while we were apart." Flowers, rocks, all kinds of things. Time together is pretty simple. Simply being in the same space, right? You don't have to be doing anything. You don't have to be doing the same thing, sitting on the couch, watching reruns of Big Bang Theory, just being in the same space. Acts of service, I think of acts of service as anything that makes your other person's life easier. So parents often, my mother is an acts of service person, and the things that she appreciates are when you did your chores as a kid, or she would leave my dad a list of things to do when we would go out of town and expect him to do them. And then if she came home and they weren't done, she would be angry because she would felt like if she had asked him to do something and he had not done that, so therefore he must not love her. And then finally, what's more common in my experience and my observation amongst women is words of affirmation. And words of affirmation are anything, any kind of words or gesture where you're communicating, "You are, I affirm you. I affirm you. So it can be things like, you're really smart and beautiful, and that's all very nice, but it's more than that. That's a funny joke. That's a good idea. It's basically affirming a person for who they are, how they are, what they think, what they value. When your partner comes in and says, well, that's the stupidest TV show I've ever watched. Why in the world do you think that's funny? That's not words of affirmation. Right. And so in one of your assignments, I've asked you to take this little quiz, learn what your love language is, and offer something that someone should do. Right. So if you're touched, they should hold your hand, and then something they shouldn't do. Right. So my daughter, one of her languages is touch. And when she dates people that are not, what do you call it, PDF, public displays of affection, right? When they let go of her hand in public, that kind of hurts her feelings. So, or times together. Okay. Your book talks about love styles, which is kind of a classical way of thinking about being a lover. And the idea is that different people have different, it sort of implies that people are a love style, but I don't think that's a fair application. But our relationships can have a different love style. So you have the ludic lover. He or she is like that. That's the player, right? So for them, love is a game. It's a chase. That they like the uncertainty of it. The practical lover, right? So the pragma lover is a practical lover. They make romantic choices based on a good choice in partner. I think of Twilight, right, where Bella and the werewolf Jacob, right? He was a practical lover. Agape love is often thought of as like a sacrificial love or a spiritual love. Sometimes this kind of love is explained between God and people. The manic lover, I like to say that you want to avoid the manic lover, because to the manic lover, love is pain. Love hurts. I always think of that Def Leppard song, Love Bleeds, right? Love is, it's this intense, painful kind of thing. Storage, looks like storage, but I believe it's pronounced storage, is it's a comfortable, sort of protective kind of love. Often this one is described as like between a grandchild and a grandparent, right? Or a parent and that kind of thing. Compassionate lover, this is usually, we think of, this one gets applied to long-term marriages, right? Or I think it's I don't think that might not be the right word. But it's this comfortable, low maintenance, just consistent kind of love. And then the last one is an eros, or an erotic lover. This is your romantic lover. So, the idea being that we have different love relationships, and you may be in a practical love, if you're in arranged marriage, you better be a practical lover, that kind of thing. And I don't find that model all that useful. And then the third one is this idea of triangle theory of love. And the notion with this one, see, look, it's kind of got it over here, your love styles. The triangle theory of love says that all relationships have three components, or some version of these three components, that basically all relationships are limited to these three components. And that is intimacy, commitment, and passion. Passion being lust, and that kind of thing. In commitment, meaning, what I like to say is, who is the person that is most important to you? If the world collapsed, who would be that person that you would work the hardest, right? Or you would want at your side? That's commitment. Not necessarily like, I commit to stay married kind of thing. And then intimacy. And in this case, intimacy is not sexual intimacy. It's like emotional connection. So intimacy is defined as self-disclosure. I disclose to you, you disclose to me. We know each other. We know what makes the other person tick. That's emotional intimacy. But the notion is that all relationships have some combination of these three elements. Like, you might have a very best friend, and you talk about everything all the time, right? And that would be a very intimate relationship. Probably doesn't have too much passion. It may have commitment, some level of commitment. Usually good friendships have some level of commitment. Or you might be in a long-term, 60-year marriage, and you spend the evening in separate rooms and you don't have any sex anymore, but you are committed to each other. You don't necessarily have emotional intimacy. You don't have passion, but you have commitment. What are some of the other ones? That would be empty love. You can have a flirtatious love, right? So, or simply lust, and lust would just have passion. But so that's sort of the idea. And like I say, I don't find all of these all that useful. For me, the best, the most practical model of love is the love language one. Oh, look at that. I'm already past 10 minutes. So I'm going to stop again and come back. And when I come back, I'll talk about mate selection.